Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Recently, in Pulyabazi podcast on IVM, I heard a nice answer to a classic question. What is the difference between language and dialect? And the answer was really nice. A language is a dialect with a gun in hand. And although the conversation had a political and a historical bend, I was super fascinated with that. And my general curiosity about understanding language has been there. And for that, today I have Jayashree Joshi with us on AudioGyan. Jayashree studied German at JNU in New Delhi and also taught German after receiving her MA. She has been working at Goethe Institute since 1996, was a program officer for 20 years, and since 2016 has been the director of the Institute's library in Mumbai. In addition to Indian languages like Marathi, Hindi, Sanskrit, she is fluent in English and German. She has translated German poems and plays into Hindi, Marathi, English. She also writes poetry in Marathi, which is like regularly published. They've translated plays, poems, short stories, novels, and children's and youth literature from English and German into Hindi and Marathi. So with such huge body of work, I'm like really scared to ask her any questions, but I'm just going to try and pique my curiosity with few questions. So welcome, Jayashree ma'am. It's a real honor to have you on Audio Gyan.
Thank you. Abhari आहे, herzlichen Dank. It's really not so overwhelming, you know. There are people who have done much more than what I have done, and I was just blessed to have an opportunity to learn so many languages and connect with the literature of so many languages and connect with the right people who could guide me through the process of relaying that material into various languages where I have different levels of proficiency, I feel. So it's really humbling the way you have introduced me. I just want to say that I'm not director of information and library services at Goethe Institute. It's called head because
Okay.
a director, yeah. So there are different terminologies, but in the sense, I head that particular section of Max Müller Bhavan or Goethe Institute. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I've come up with few questions mainly around translation and language in general, and
Sure.
uh, yeah, it will be like just great to hear your insights about it. And please feel free to maneuver the conversation in wherever I'm falling short of even asking the right question. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but I mean, this is not going to be a scholarly presentation. I'm not going to talk so much about translation theory, and there are various propositions and essays written, critical essays, etc. So we are not going into that area. I feel we are
yes,
just going to have a chit chat about what is language, what is I mean, like for everyone to
correct.
connect with the concept, right?
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So that is a disclaimer, a big disclaimer. Thank you. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So yes. Like what does translation mean to you? And this has been my pattern now, which I've been asking every guest that what is X Y Z, and then how that definition has changed over time. So in your case, I'll there's a lot of things to be asked, but we'll start with translation. And how is it placed? Like, is it a skill? Is it an art? Is it a craft? If or any other taxonomies around it?
My God. I mean, this is right at the onset. This is you have opened up a plethora. I mean, this has at least 1,000 questions. Incorporated in these 3 points that you mentioned. So, if you look up the word translation in the internet, thesaurus, you have 34 words for translation to explain the term or which can be used as synonyms. And for me, because I have been associated with translation and literary, we are talking about literary translations because legal and commercial and technical translation is really some area that I have dealt with in the last century, if I may say so. So I'm going to primarily speak about my understanding of the concept called literary translation. So when you look at, again, coming back to these 34 words, for me, translation is a sum total of some of these concepts. Like it could be an adaptation plus explanation plus reading and rereading, then rendering, then transcreation, as some people may call it. Then it is a reconstruction. It is also a kind of decoding that is required. Then it is paraphrasing, rephrasing, restatement, sometimes metaphrase. So, all these words are mentioned in the context of the concept of in the concept of translation, and a translator has to go through most of these processes in order to render an acceptable translation of any given piece of literature. It could be a novel, it could be a story, it could be poetry, it could be theater translation, it could be an essay, it could be travelogue. So there are various genres of literature which a translator wants to translate. The translator has to first decide about the translatability of that particular piece that he or she chooses to translate. Now, for simplicity, I'm going to say she or he all the time, so it will be interchangeable for translator. Yeah, I mean, you have to keep that protocol in mind, but still, yeah. So I think translation is, again, as I said, it's a mixed experience, because you cannot put it in a framework and say this is the science of translation, or this is how the artistic skill can be developed for translation. Of course, there is a methodology that you should follow, and there are various approaches, but then you enter the arena of theory. And my experience tells me that every genre has a different kind of approach to the text, the access to the text. How you, because you have to first understand the text, read it, reread it, paraphrase it for yourself, understand the nuances, understand the high points, the dominant points of that particular artwork, let's say. Now, see, I'm saying artwork. It itself says that every literary piece that you pick up for translation has a scientific methodology behind it, because you have to define for yourself a method and then approach the activity of translation. But it has its own aesthetic norms that you cannot overlook. So it's I'm not saying it's a confluence of science and art. No, it is that in between path. There is a certain aesthetics, there is a kind of artistic element, but that is something that you have to create as a translator, where you become a transculturator. This is a wonderful term that I have learned in recent times. Transculturating. I don't even. I think it was about a Chinese scholar, and he's talking about translator as a transculturator, and I simply loved it, because when you are translating something, you are going from the source language to target language. Everyone knows that it has been done to, I mean, one has chewed upon this concept, so I'm not going to elaborate upon that you carry the socio-cultural realities and try to transplant them into another culture, whereby you also have to think about the typical form of expressions in that particular language, where you are planting the foreign work by the means of translation. So my idea of translation is this, that you are actually relaying the meaning. And by relaying, I'm not saying that it's a kind of assembly line. It's apart from transforming the text, you are also there are processes involved of cognition, discourse, and there's an action by which between human and textual actors, in the physical and social setting. So yeah, that is a translation for me. And what was your second question?
Hey, has this definition changed? I mean, because like I'm in that phase of my life where there are certain things which you take as hypothesis, and then you enter the antithesis of it, where you are questioning everything. And then maybe like, fortunately, if you land up in like synthesis, it's great. So my direction of asking this question is always that, because you have certain definitions when you start a career, or when you start exploring that domain altogether. And then as you go nuanced into the subject, things change, right? So has it changed over
Yeah, but
time?
so
And
the concept, if you look at translation as a whole, obviously, I as a person, I have evolved. If I may say so, I think there is a certain progress in my understanding of the world and of the realities, various the sum total of realities around me. So obviously, my pattern of responding to the reality has also changed because of my personal chronological growth, so that enhancement of knowledge or accumulated facts, let's say, and my interpretation of it, that is what I call epistemologically knowledge. And yeah, so my capability or of translating something has certainly it has increased, I feel. I mean, qualitatively. And also, if you're talking about how translation has changed in the last so many years that I'm engaged with this activity, obviously, a new era of translation has begun. I mean, way back when translator or translation was not a very really huge, what is a usually respected profession. It was always secondary,
correct,
and literary translation, forget about it. I mean, there was no, as I said, of course, if you are talking about Susan Bassett or etc., I mean, who have written, or Holmes, who have written theories of translation and wonderful, wonderful books. But how much literature do I have back home? In which language? Where do we talk about how to translate? How to, how much serious thought is given to this idea of translation? It is a huge responsibility, because you as a translator, you are borrowing someone else's thoughts. I think in ancient philosophy, a translator is compared to midwife,
mm-hmm.
actually.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
So
Mm-hmm.
and my objection always was, no, midwife doesn't go through the labor pain. A midwife helps in giving birth to that new entity, but a translator is co-creating that entity at times. And if the translator himself is an author or a poet, then obviously, as Ranjit Hoskote, the renowned translator, calls it, it is cross-pollination. So, there is a kind of hidden inspiration, because you are, when you're translating another a script from another language, then the images, then the images and words and adjectives and semantics, everything from that language it's heavy, it's bulky. You have to transport it to your language, and then you have to alter it, because finally you are doing it for a reader. And you have to always look at I'll see, in Marathi we call it lasavi, the least common denominator. So you have to look at that and then translate. I'm not saying, I'm not all, but right now maybe I'm talking about literature that is read by all. If you are talking about Derrida or Spivak or some such heavy stuff, then obviously you have to use a particular register. Or for translation of Karl Marx or Hegel, then obviously you cannot skirt that issue. You have to have your register in place. Then the common reader has to make that effort, and also inform himself about what he is going to read. if required, he also has to do some kind of homework or sped work. So that is translation, and that understanding has dawned upon the reader in India now. When I say India, I'm only talking about a few languages that I connect with, but I think more or less we have arrived now as readers. And since we have arrived as readers and we understand what is a good translation or bad translation, the translator's responsibility and accountability and status has also grown. They have also grown. So what I would like to say is the new era of translation has already begun. I mean, when did the real translation start in India from foreign languages? It started with colonialism, right? So chiefly we translated from Western English, the Western literature English, and only after globalization. I mean, I'm reminded of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German author here. So Goethe Institute is named after this author. So he had uh, propagated an idea of Weltliteratur, which means world literature. So it is not a ready-made cosmopolitanism for universal consumption as it is projected today. So it is an embrace of diversity approach through the artisanal practice of translation and dialogue. So world literature, he used this term in he stated it in letters to Johann Ackermann. As back in back in the if you go back in the time 1827, he already knew what he was talking about, what we are witnessing today. So this is he refers to the dissemination of literature from and to countries across the globe. So what he said then, national literature is now a rather unmeaning term. The epoch of world literature is at hand, and everyone must strive to hasten its approach. So that is a message that is applicable even today. Yeah, so that is today, if you see, most of the translated literature is fiction, poetry, a little bit of theater plays, which we are also trying to do from, I mean, getting plays from Germany into various Indian languages, etc. But a lot of non-fiction is also being translated. And I was told by a renowned publisher that the readership is growing for non-fiction. That is for theory, for political analysis at the global level, which is a welcoming change, because of this availability of translated works into regional languages, regional Indian languages, local languages. Some people call it vernacular, but I strongly protest that term. That's why I always call it a local language or regional language. So translation has not only grown in its recognition, but it has also, what do you say, a German word for that is Entfaltung. I'm trying to get the right word for that. So there is an enhancement at various levels of the area of work or scope of work of translation. Um, does that make sense to you as an answer to your question?
In fact, that spurred many more questions around it, but I'll take one by one. So, you mentioned about it being like a somewhere between art and science, right? And so now, is this the case with literary work only, specifically, or it happens with like laws and other stuff which is also translated across geographies?
Across geographies, that's a wonderful term that you have used, because across geographies, we are talking about cultural sciences, and geography is only a small part of it, which gives it an orientation. But so the legal framework, the science, medical texts, or commercial contracts, etc., they have a set phrase, set of phrases, set of how they use the words, how they form the sentences. It's like as is, where is. And if you look at its Marathi translation, you understand the as is, where is better than what is translated into Marathi. So because it is very Sanskritized Marathi, I'm sure you are going to come to Praman Bhasha after that. But yeah, but I'm not going in that direction. But again, I am saying that I'm not trying to say that it's easier to do legal translation. It's a different ball game altogether. Legal, commercial, I'll tell you what my methodology was before all these softwares came into being for technical translation. I used to read I had translated some specifications for Mercedes, how they prepare the glass for the window shield, whatever it is called, no? the pane. And then they had that drop ball test. So I read all that. Then whatever words I did not know and they were recurring, so I wrote it down by hand so that I could replace it, because back then I only had a typewriter, right? So what I'm saying is the recurring word will still mean the same in the technical.
Yeah, it's sort of primitive Google Translate. Like you just
Google Translate gives you a working translation, and obviously even in technical and commercial all such translations, a final translation should be rendered, or editing should be done by a human translator. That is what I feel, because you have to be, there is a certain sanctity. You can't just, many engineers used to tell me, you just give us the working translation. Now just take the word Scheibe. Scheibe is one word, German word, which can mean disc or plate, depending on the context. And it's a technical translation. It has got nothing to do with various meanings and multiple layers of meaning, etc. It's just one plain word, but it means differently in a given context. So that is what Google will not give you, and that is where you need the human translator. Just an example. Yeah, and then again, what you spoke about
the science and the
the
no,
science
so I
and the
think, yeah,
art.
I think I got the drift. It's mainly when it comes to literary work, it is more about understanding a lot more nuances than the commercial hygiene type stuff. Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, and then
I'm not comparing difficult or easy to translate kind of a thing, but generally
yeah, because
how hmm.
yeah, I understand, and thank you for that, because that concept of translatability of text, we make our lives much simpler. I mean, why a poet somewhere sitting in the same world, on the same earth, and responding to a similar reality that is created by human beings, he is responding to that reality. Why is it so difficult for me to absorb it and tell my readers about his reality? I mean, why should I use the criterion of translatability? And Manglesh Dabral ji had once mentioned that only bad poems can be translated beautifully. There was a lot of arguments and counter arguments, but that just shows that translation is taken seriously. And I just want to mention this one word by Valerie Henishok. She's a professor of literature and translation. So that's a compelling essay she has written, where she says text becomes successfully worlded. The noun world and worlded only through interpretive acts of mediation, profoundly bound up in aspects of culture. So as literature moves across boundaries of culture and language, a text can never be independent of its translation. That is what she's trying to say. But I mean, obviously, when it moves across the boundaries of culture and language, it is transformed into a unique cultural artifact. That is her thesis. We don't have to discuss that right now. But then Gayatri Spivak, you must have heard that name as well. So she holds the alternate view that the study of world literature often ignores the power of work in its own language. So she believes that we should not homogenize cultures and languages when we undertake the study of translated text. So that is an interesting thought. And if anyone is interested, they should try to see how we can protect the diversity of languages and cultures that are present in the literary works while translating it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Actually,
mean,
sorry, I'll interrupt
yeah,
you because
yeah.
I have like one question around it. And since you mentioned about these two arguments also, and these itself have to be like, matlab, what detail mein, like you have to study, otherwise it's
Ha.
yeah. But I was listening to one podcast many years ago
Mm-hmm.
in which the person was saying that there are like, and there was, I don't remember the name, but she was saying that there are certain concepts which are inherently Western, right? So for she took an example of like, please give me my space. Whereas in India, uh, because of the social fabric, there isn't like a real space such, right? Which is now getting acknowledged, but initially it wasn't. So how do you translate that? So the bigger question which wanted to ask you was that, then how do you retain like the original author's sense and spirit? I mean, like, abhi space jaisa concept, if it's not there, then how would you
But
arrive at that?
it's
Or
an, yeah, you don't have to translate the word, give me my, the sentence, give me my space, literally. What does he mean? He means, let me be alone for some time. Let me, I need some quiet. I need some time to myself. You, that is where I say that you reread it, rephrase it. You are not losing its spirit, and that's the word that you have used. You are not losing the spirit by creating another concept that relates to I need my space. When in Marathi you say तिला जरा वेळ एकटं बसू दे, that is I need my space, and that form of expression is there. मुझे थोड़ी देर अकेला छोड़ दो. In Hindi you say that, right? So this concept is very much there. Only it is expressed differently. So it is absolutely the translator's prerogative to decide whether he wants to go that way, or he wants to give a clumsy translation, verbatim translation of this space. मला माझा अवकाश दे. You can't say that. Huh. You can say that, but it sounds so foreign. And if you want to retain that flavor of foreignness in your translation, go ahead with it. Because the data, translation doesn't have a method. Because again, there could be various approaches. There could be a literal translation. There could be a single dominant translation. That is, if the rhythm is dominant in that particular poem, then you focus on that and little defocus from the rest of the material that is produced in that poem. I'm just taking poem because this is the easiest that comes to my mind right now. I'll give you an interesting example now for this. The integration of form and meaning in literary works. That's what we are talking about right now. So there is a Portuguese poem by Cassiano Ricardo. It is entitled Serenata Sintetica. And just look at the sound of that, yeah, because that is also very important when you are translating a poem. It's not only the words, it's not only what do you say,
the phonetics are also
format,
important.
the phonetics, yeah, not only the format. I was looking for that word, yeah, the format, but also phonetics, and just look at the phonetics or rhythm. Now this poem goes like this: Rua torta, lua morta, tua porta. Short poem, huh? Rua torta, lua morta, tua porta. So this refers to a small town, a small, very small town with winding streets. That is Rua torta, winding streets, a fading moon, lua morta, and the hint of an enormous affair. That is your door. So tua porta. You know these words. Somewhere you have heard this. In Portuguese, it is so nice. जैसे वाइंडिंग स्ट्रीट्स, वळणा वळणाच्या वाटा, फेडिंग मून, मावळता चंद्र, तुझं दार. That's all, you know. So, but I could not retain that rhythm. And in English, it's really, I mean, there is absolutely nothing left of that rhythm. And that precise, that there are 6 words, and it gives you, it opens a huge canvas in front of you. But when you say winding streets, fading moon, your door, okay, I accept it. but that rhythm is lost. The real fun is lost. Yeah. So that is where you have to make compromises. But still, in English, it creates another poem, right? It's not the same poem because it has lost its rhythm, but it's still maintaining the principle of 6 words, maybe. I don't know whether you can say only, yeah, you can say fading moon. So yeah.
So yeah, I mean the kind of things you're saying, I have to like listen to this couple of times more to understand and then connect the
Yeah,
dots in my
See, right now I'm only, जैसे बोलते हैं ना कि बीज डाल रखे हैं. So whosoever wants to read more or understand more, the world is open, world of literature and criticism, of course. Yeah.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. So I'll take like two slightly a different track here, and I wanted to understand like the legendary Hindi critic Namwar Singh commented on like the Hindi language and its journey in the 20th century. So, is there any equivalent in about grammar or aesthetics of poetry in Marathi?
The entire 20th century.
Yeah, I mean any time frame you can pick, because I'm not like a very literally expert, so I've just tried to connect the dots
See,
where I could.
there are then there is a lot of work in the field of history. Let's say, history of Marathi literature or history of poetry. So I don't really know. I mean, Namwar Singh ji, I mean, what can I say? To augment his statement. So I'm right now not trying to link my statement with Namwar Singh ji's statement, because I'm also not an authority to speak about Hindi poetry. I have only read it in bits and pieces. So it's complete development in the 20th century that is really a huge field for me. So if you are talking about Marathi poetry, then obviously there are certain things that I would like to mention. As you know, with Bengali literature, Marathi literature is also oldest of the Indo-Aryan literatures. No? And in the 13th century, there were two Brahmanical sects, like Mahanubhava and Varkari Panth. That's what they are called. And they shaped Marathi literature significantly. So the latter was more productive, and it had its association with Bhakti movement, and then there was a certain form of formal understanding of lyrics, and it was also connected with the popular cult of Vithoba at Pandharpur. So you have these names like I think Viveka Sindhu was written by Mukundaraj, and Jnaneshwara wrote Jnaneshwari, as you know, and Jnaneshwar and Namdev, they actually, he was his younger contemporary. So the devotional songs are included in the book of six. Namdev has written these songs, and they are in the Adi Granth, part of Adi Granth. And then you have the 16th century. I'm giving you an overview. Then you have these are the milestones, like and so then you have Eknath. So his Bhagavad Puran. You must have heard these names from your grandmother or so. Yeah. So this is the complete bhakti poetry, and then of course you have the voices of descent from Tukaram. I mean the earliest. Poetry of resistance in Marathi literature, I can call it. So. And then you have these Shahiri Pawadas. Sambhaji Bhagat is taking forward this tradition with many others, capable singers and writers. So these Pawadas are heroic stories. So they're very popular among Marathi people. And this was during Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's time, the great Maratha king. And he led his armies against the might of Mughal emperors. And that's when the Pawadas were used to tell the heroic stories. And then for the martial people, I mean, and then the real modern period, if you are talking about that began with Keshav Sut, Krishnaji Keshav Damle. So his poetry was influenced, not inspired, influenced by the 19th century British Romanticism and liberalism, then European nationalism. and obviously the greatness of Maharashtrian history. So he declared a revolt against the traditional Marathi poetry and started a school of poetry which emphasized home and nature and the glorious past and pure lyricism also. But after that, there was a group of poets called Ravi Kiran Mandal. So they proclaimed that poetry was not only for the erudite and sensitive. I mean, it should not only have those elements, but it is a part of everyday life. So that is how, and then after 1945, Marathi poetry sought to explore human life in all its variety, subjective and personal, colloquial use of colloquial language. That also is an important milestone. Then you have both directions of thought or schools of thought: art for art's sake and art for life's sake in Marathi literature, as in most of the literature of those times. So this renaissance, see, Marathi language, nobody, I mean, there are two theories, I think. Either it is followed from Sanskrit, or it came from Sauraseni or Prakrit or Maharashtri, and then there are so many, I think around 2,500 Farsi and Arabian words in it, Urdu words. Then you have at least so many dialects in Marathi. Like you have Kokani, you have Ahirani, you have Gomantaki Boli. I mean, Kokani and Gomantaki is again different. Then you have Tanjavur Marathi, that's the kind of Marathi that's spoken in Tanjavur. Then there's a Karnataki style of Marathi. Within Maharashtra, you have Vaidarbhi, you have Ahirani, you have Khandeshi is not exactly Varhadi you have, and then you have the so-called Praman Bhasha. It used to be. It used to be Praman Bhasha because that is what one used for writing in the books, and that was spoken to us. So for the general discourse, an official philological or philosophical discourse or literary discourse, this particular language was the form of language was used, which was called Praman Bhasha then. But now, as you are asking me about how the Marathi literature has progressed, I think the biggest achievement is that all dialects, there could be many more. I can count at least 25, but due to paucity of time, I'm not going into it. So the biggest achievement for me is that everybody who has something to narrate, something to tell, need not shy away from expression because he or she does not master the Praman Bhasha. They can, all of us can express ourselves in the language or the dialect or the form of language that is suitable to us. We can pick and choose the topics. There is no topic that we cannot touch with any form of language in Marathi literary scene right now. Of course, there will be there are self-proclaimed guardians of propriety who will raise their voice and say, no, you cannot write this. That is a different story. But what I'm saying is, Boli Bhasha, a dialect, has found its inroads in the mainstream of Marathi literature, and you are talking about you can read the voices of dissent, voices of resistance, Vidrohi literature. I refrain to call it Dalit literature. Of course, there is an account of the ordeal of called Dalit life, and it was very important to awaken Marathi literature from that deep slumber of soft, mushy, and romanticized ideas of literature, and show them the mirror, and show the readership and writers a mirror, and that hard-hitting layer of reality. That was done by Vidrohi Sahitya or Dalit Sahitya. They use it interchangeably. One should use it interchangeably also. And that was the new Manu, as they call it in Marathi, the new wave for me. So in Navadottari, there are there are multiple analysis in Sathottari Kavita, Navadottari Kavita, and now the poetry in 21st century. And if we are talking about literature, Then obviously, what we generally don't talk about is drama or theater. So there we are terribly lacking, because I'm trying to follow new writing in my language, and in the field of theater as well. And I feel there is a lot. I mean, there is a huge gap, and we have to. I mean, we have to translate, borrow, adapt, get inspired, but create good theater by means of translation, or rephrasing, or whatever we discuss. So, but I must say that what started in Marathi literature long ago, what I spoke about, like the Santa, Panta, and Pandit Kavya, as they call it, so that is the Brahmanical tradition also partly, but then again, a little bit of resistance. So that was the spiritual democracy that prevailed then, and now hopefully it will get reinstated. And yeah, so I still,
Why do you think so? Like, as in, like, in which context it will be reinstated?
that everybody gets a voice to tell his story, because every life is a story, and in the way he or she wants. There is this style of free verse, which is niryamak. It's not muktachan, niryamak, but there is an inherent rhythm to that text. So that is the form. Then form and language, as I said, anybody can. I mean, you can write something in Varadi, something in Khandeshi, something, and you still find a reader, and the reader that doesn't who doesn't understand it will make an effort to understand it. So that is some revolution that is right now in budding, but I'm very hopeful and positive about it, that it will change the face of Marathi literature. Yeah.
Correct, correct. Maybe philosophically it is very new, and that's why people are first accepting to understand and then maybe criticizing. So the cycle will continue, but it will be
Yeah.
like a longer run, and probably this is the start. Yeah. So there is acceptance.
Yeah, there is only that there is an imminent danger that I see, that a certain group of people will promote a certain kind of literature, which should not happen. So a literature is not should not have an agenda. It has to have that kind of universality, and if it doesn't have it within your own state, what are we talking about then? No? So yeah, I mean, I often hear that Marathi literature does not get international recognition because it is not translated into English. Okay, fine, but how are you so sure that it still has that kind of that Vaishvik or universal element that it should reach to the entire world through English translation? I mean, I have seen people translating from languages that they don't even speak that language, but they pick up the book, sit with the author, and translate it into English. Fair enough, and a legitimate justification that nobody else is doing it, so I'll do it. So even that is one step forward. I'm not talking about how good or bad that translation, because nobody can really say that as long as you are giving the message. Again, I don't even think we have advanced that kind of advanced level in criticism of translation. It's all borrowed, it's all borrowed. And so, and again, English is an associate language for us, so it's not our mother tongue. So uh, well, what I wanted to mention to you about it, now that we are speaking about translation. So, long ago, I think in the 18th century or 19th, I'm forgetting, but Hari Keshav ji had translated some parts of Paradise Lost, which is Paradise Lost. Then Mahadev Shastri Kolatkar had translated Scott Longfellow Wordsworth. I mean, I don't know whether he translated it or he sort of recreated it, but let's say translated. Then there is another interesting thing. Bajaba Ramchandra Pradhan, he wrote an epos. It's Daivaseni, sort of what do you call it? Khandakavya. I don't know the right word for Khandakavya. I think it is an epic, but No, Khandaka, that is Mahakavya. Okay, we'll come back to that.
I'm totally clueless.
Yeah. So, Sir Walter Scott's Lady of the Lake. So his Daivaseni, this Khandakavya was based on that. So there is a translation and also his adaptation of Lady of the Lake. And Mahadev Moreshwar Kunte, this is the last thing that I have to mention. So he had written Raja Shivaji. That is his poetic work, but he had written a wonderful foreword to it in English, and I recommend that everyone should read it who wants to do something with Marathi and English translations. It's a wonderful. Yeah, and then there are, of course, various efforts of translating William Blake and Wordsworth and Coleridge and Byron and Shelley and etc. So my first statement was that colonialism introduced us to the idea of translation, and now you have translations thanks to social media. I mean, anybody picks up any poem from anywhere and it's English translation and translates it. So the seriousness of poetry translation has really it's come under a question mark, but at least people are reading it. People are getting introduced. Even the bad translation is a translation and effort has gone into it, so why not?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you have to, and before you can understand what is good, you need to understand, like, you have to go through the bad.
Yeah, again, you are coming back to your thesis and antithesis. I can understand.
Yeah. And ma'am, you mentioned about the two positions or two schools, right? I believe like Ashok Shahane said, like, all languages born out of verses and songs. So is there any correlation there, any insights there, or like how would you respond to that then?
I mean, Ashok ji, again, you are taking such names of such erudite people whose life is literature. But yeah, okay. So all languages originate out of verses because verses are good to remember. They have they have a rhythm, a rhyme, and it's easier to remember. And that is what our oral history also says all along. Yeah. In oral history, of course, Vedas, if you go back to Sanskrit, that these Apaurushaya, that is Shruti and Smriti. So obviously there's something that is heard and retained in memory. And as we say, the oral history also has a lot of material. Also in Marathi language, the Ovi and Abhanga. So Ovi was, these are those couplets that women used to sing. And the topic of those Ovis were obviously their home front and relations and the nature. And they used to use the simile of some natural phenomenon and say like, my relation with my husband should grow like the banyan tree, some sort of such
Metaphorical
couplets.
Yeah,
and also a lot of mythology and stories from stories of heroes used there. I mean, when I say heroes, it could be Sita, it could be Draupadi, it could be Mandodari, Ahalya, because the women can actually relate to women figures in mythology because they understand their pain, their agony, and their position in the patriarchal system back then, and how they were treated. All women in our mythology, how they were treated, and what kind of feminine definition is emerging out of it now in this century. So what I was trying to say is, Marathi has certainly a long history or oral history of verses, and Abhanga is obviously the bhakti poetry. And if you go back to the basic, the first proofs of Marathi literature, then you have Leela Charitra. Then I'm forgetting the other names, but Leela Charitra certainly. Then you have Ruddipur Leela and Smriti Sthal. So these are the three the biographies. So these three ancient works of Marathi are actually biographies. But the verses, the first collection of verses by Mahadamba, and it is called Dhawle. And these are the songs which were sung for the bridegroom during a wedding ceremony. So then you have Siddhanta Sutra Path. Then, I mean, if you are to, looking at the ancient period. And so whatever material is available in writing, it's certainly in a text prose form, but oral history goes back and goes back to whatever time, ancient time. And I don't know whether there is that is certainly poetry. And but you have raised an important question. I will now look into it and get back to you. What kind of history of Ovi and Abhanga is available to us, and what is the time period, time frame of that? Yeah, that yeah.
So, the last part of the conversation, actually, conversation, it's just so enlightening and
My
you have
God,
just
please. No,
no,
I'm just
you have opened
yeah.
up the canvas, and because I was listening to this Pulia Bazi where I started off with, and because of Hindi films and Hindi literature, and exposed to Begum Akhtar and a few of the so I have some words like मतलब भोजपुरी है, मैथिली है, अवधी है, and those, but इथे विदर्भी विदर्भाची आहे आणि like it's not even registered in my dictionary at all. So like thanks to you for like at least making me sensitive to these, and I'll probably do some research somewhere.
So I'll just give you some more words, maybe it's like soft tone Marathi, hard tone Marathi, Karnataki Marathi, Dhadi, Kokani, Agri, Sangameshwari, Malwani, Goan Kokani, Karnataki Kokani, Ahirani. So, you know, this is your takeaway today. Then, yeah, Baglani, Gujar, Leva Patidari, Amalneri, Varhadi, Madia, Indori Marathi, and Tanjavuri. So these, I was referring to this. Now I got it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The last part which I wanted to ask was which was more contemporary. And have you seen like because a very close friend of mine, she's a translator, and uh, I might bring it down to a very trivial level, which is not like connected to literature as such, but even in the phone conversations which we have, you get this Vodafone message or Airtel message की तो व्यक्ती कोणाशी तरी बोलत आहे rather than ती व्यक्ती, right? What is happening? And again, in my antithesis and thesis wala jo struggle hai, one side is saying that yes, there is something called as Praman Bhasha, and there is an authoritative language, and one
Oh.
side, because of the social media and the uh, just the gates open to everyone, the other side is saying what is Praman, like how can you define
No,
everything
no,
is.
no. But yeah,
So I'm you got my question, right? I'm stuck in
I
this
got your
entire thing.
question.
And then on top of that, is there any pattern which you have seen? Is the language quality, because you're talking about a particular class of literally people, right? And then there is like actually, matlab,
Mm,
so
yeah. But let me. I got your question. Now, first of all, I feel there has to be an element of respect towards your own mother tongue. That is number one. Right now, that recklessness and carelessness that has crept into these kind of translations, a quick thing. The Google gives you some kind of translation and you just use it. Now, Marathi has been very flexible. It has also accepted words from English and from Farsi and Urdu and Arabic, but it has accepted those words and made them their own. When there was no parallel word or a very difficult word, I mean, it's easy to say signal than saying agamana, nirgamana, nirdeshaka pattika, trideepa pattika. I mean, there is a word. You can create a word in Marathi, but it cannot be used for practical purposes. So you say signal. So that is acceptable to a Marathi reader now. Marathi eyes, Marathi brain accepts that. But when we have the word vyakti in Marathi, and we have a grammar set for that word, how to use that word, and if it is feminine, ti vyakti, and I know that. So when someone who is confused about his Hindi and Marathi grammar is using that as a standard message. Listen, you are using it right now, but I'm also part of designing the course material for learning Marathi or teaching Marathi to non-Marathi people. What am I trying to tell them? If I say, okay, now you listen to these Marathi messages or you listen to the Marathi advertisements, what am I trying to tell them? That this is correct Marathi? It is not about Praman Bhasha. It's about Yogya, Ayogya, Uchit, Anuchit. That the word, is this word used in a correct fashion? In German, we have feminine, neutrum, and masculine. And with each noun, we have to mention the article. That is to purush or ti purush or te purush. You can't have a ti purush and my marks will be cut, because there is a structure. You cannot take away the spine of the language. And when you say to vyakti, I as a Marathi and Hindi speaker understand that somebody who's dealing more with Hindi language has just come up with this. But then isn't it my collective responsibility to point out and object to it? It has got nothing to do with dialect. It has got nothing to do with Praman Bhasha. It is the structure of the language that you are destroying by calling it to vyakti. Or there is something like saban galat nahi. I mean, galne is leaking in Marathi. What they want to say is jizat nahi, but in Hindi it is galna. Or you see that word satarka. Satarka is with logic in Marathi. Tarka is logic, and being logical is he satarka vidhan ahe. What you have to say is sajag, savad raha, sajag raha. That is acceptable, but Hindi media has overpowered. Even in the most of the serials, if you see, it is like माझी मदत करा, त्याचा ऍक्सिडेंट झाला. No, in Marathi say मला मदत करा, त्याला ऍक्सिडेंट झाला. But these are simple things, and these have got nothing to do with respect or disrespect to Praman Bhasha. It is, I'm saying, it is the spine of the language. This is how a language is developed. Go ahead and say in Marathi, वो व्यक्ति आई नहीं थी. You will be corrected. आया नहीं था बोलो. Because that is how that language is built up. These are the elements. This is the flesh of that language. You cannot take away that element and say, but still it is Marathi. No. So it is pathetic, I know, and it's deplorable in most of social media. But okay, then again I say, but somebody is expressing something. But it is not pardonable to use it as a standard pattern of that language. No, I disagree. And I don't have a solution for that right now, apart from being critical about it all the time, raising our voice and say, please speak in Marathi and use proper Marathi. That is, there is a basic minimum justification for using the words the way we use them. And there is a grammar of each language. And there is also the semantics of each language. And it's not only about Marathi, it must be about all Indian languages, this onslaught of inappropriate translations, incapable translators, and always taking the easy way out.
Long time ago, I interviewed Shrikant Nivsarkar. He's a furniture designer. And I asked him what is like how do you define good design and bad design? And he said it's not about good and bad. It is about being appropriate.
Yeah. So I only want to mention one thing now. Any translation is the cross-cultural transmission, as we have seen. So what animates this true cross-cultural transmission is curiosity. So the key to solving problems of translation is asking questions. You ask detailed questions, pedantic questions, argumentative, silly, serious, searching questions, but you must ask questions. When you ask a question, you will not make a mistake like to vyakti. As simple as that. So whether it is a one-line translation or whether you are translating Homer or Iliad or whosoever, this approach always helps. Curiosity and asking questions to whosoever is available. You can ask a question to a book, you can ask a question to a site, you can ask to a living author, you can ask the expert, you can ask a scholar, but please try to make it a waterproof kind of expression. Your translation should be that. Of course there will be loopholes, and the water will seep in and say there is a little bit of fungus there. Fine, then it's our job to clean that.
I mean, I am short of words. I'll just ask one standard question, which would be really helpful. Is that, like, who are the translators you admire, and like, if you can give me like few names, and maybe why also, like, why these translators?
Yeah, certainly. Well, most of the translators that I admire and like to read the translators is because of these qualities, what I mentioned just now, that they do their proper research, and they just don't say that I have to finish this translation. They enjoy doing that translation, and they have an intention to translate a particular work. They have some message to give, which they feel that a particular book can give. So as I start with Marathi, and in Marathi, I mean, there are many more, but I'm mentioning only two or three. One is Ganesh Vispute, of course, and he does wonderful translations because he is a writer himself. He is a critic, and he is a painter. That also adds to his understanding of poetry more, and he translates it beautifully. Then I simply admire Mugdha Karnik. I had read her Atlas Shrugged. I mean, fantastic. You can't imagine. It's too good. I cannot analyze it now. We will need another session. But Mugdha Karnik's translations, even on social media, she is very active, and the kind of words she uses, and the correct and crisp register of words that she creates for this is very appropriate. Then, for English translations, of course, Ranjit Hoskote is I call him Prabhu. Shabda Prabhu, because he's really good in his translations. He translates from German into English, and Lal Ded, the Kashmiri poetess, he has translated her poetry as well. He translates a lot, and he writes a lot. So that is again, both activities get inspired by each other, I feel. Then the highest pedestal I would put Vishnu Khareji. I had the fortune to work with him since 1996 because I was in Delhi, and his understanding of literature and his commentary and he was a poet himself. He's a writer. The way he used to understand it, like with one click, amazing. And accordingly, his translations, in Marathi, I forgot one name, Prafull Shiledar, who is also a renowned poet, but his translations are also fantastic. So we talked about English with Shantabai Gokhale from the earlier generation, great translator. But again, I'm looking at the scenario and thinking who have translated good plays into Marathi. And I think we have to fill that void somehow. People out there, please listen to this. And so Hindi, and there are a lot of good translations into German by Martin Kempschen, Professor Martin Kempschen, who stays in Shantiniketan, from Bengali into German. A lot of good translations. Even Gitanjali, I think he has done into German. So I admire him, though I cannot read Gitanjali in Bangla, but what he has rendered and in German, that's very good. And of course, I admire Friedrich Schlegel, who has translated Abhijnana Shakuntalam and bits and pieces of Veda into German without visiting India. He learned Sanskrit in Paris and he translated it. And in fact, that was supposed to be my PhD thesis, his understanding of Indian culture as an outsider, something like that, So, So my admiration for translations in German started with that. Yeah. And I would like to mention that in Marathi, we have two publications. One is My Maushi and another one is Kelyane Bhashantar. They are dedicated to translated works. and they regularly publish. I think they are quarterlies, and they publish translations from various Indian and international languages into Marathi. And there are two more called Yugavani and Kavyagraha. They also from time to time, but regularly, they publish translations into Marathi of poetry majorly. And there is one Diwali issue called Uttam Anuvad. They always have a theme, and then they collect translations of material around that particular theme, be it letters and poetry and short stories or parts of novel, etc. etc. So a lot of avenues are there for Marathi translation, and we can create more if we take this activity seriously.
Absolutely. I don't know how to like conclude this. I'll just say thank you. It was like wonderful talking to you.
I would say thank you for the giving so much importance and significance to the concept of translation. That only shows how that we are on the firmly on the cultural map now, the translators. Yeah. So you're most welcome whenever you want to have any other conversation about any other topic. And it gave me a great pleasure to be part of this. Maybe I've forgotten some names, and I don't claim to be the last word in this field, but I just, from whatever humble background I have in all, they are dabble into so many fields. So, pardon me for my inadequacies. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher, or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.